Karen stood in the doorway, arms crossed and voice tinged with guilt and entitlement as she said, "I just think it would be less awkward if you heard it from me." Greg remained silent, focused on the wedding budget spread out before him, before finally looking up at Karen. She continued, "Rachel wants Brian to walk her down the aisle." The pen slipped from Greg's hand, and Karen saw a flicker of emotion cross his face. "It would mean a lot," Karen said quickly, shrugging. "You can still come, of course, if you want." The following silence was not passive. Rather, it was surgical, cold, precise, evoking a sense of something being excised. "Listen, quick break. We set a goal to hit 10K subscribers, so tap subscribe if you're enjoying these wild stories of betrayal. Now let's get back to the madness." Greg rose from his seat, passed her without a word, and vanished into the hallway. As Karen called after him, "Greg, don't make this weird. It's just symbolic." Brian's presence felt all too familiar lately, and Rachel sensed the click of the door to his home office closing shut. Alone and enclosed, Greg sat in the dark for what seemed like an eternity, the blue light from his monitor casting an eerie glow. Beside the screen sat a small photo of Rachel at 6 years old, grinning in a pink bike helmet while riding the first bicycle he had ever assembled for her by hand in the garage, all while Karen claimed she was off to yoga in a distant town. Leaning forward, Greg opened his personal finance file. There were a total of 14 transactions linked to various wedding expenses such as the dress deposit, DJ contract, venue retainer, bar service, makeup artist, and honeymoon suite. These payments were all made from his retirement account, not because he was asked to, but because that's what fathers do. This particular dad took care of everything without hesitation. He logged into his banking app, transferred the remaining balance of approximately $36,000 from the wedding account back to his savings, and canceled any upcoming transfers. Without any trace of anger or frustration, he composed a short email to the wedding planner, requesting to be removed from any further coordination as his role was complete. He clicked send without hesitation. Next, he retrieved his old journal from the drawer, a journal he hadn't opened in years. Inside, he came across 2 pages he never removed. The first entry dated back to 5 years ago, documenting the day he discovered Terrence's burner phone tucked behind the laundry detergent. The more recent entry detailed the day he discreetly purchased a small fishing cabin in the Carolinas under a trust without any family name. He quickly checked the flight details, booking a one-way ticket for Friday. Just as he was about to jot down another thought, the text cut off. He smiled, a reflex rather than out of satisfaction, as he did something he hadn't done in a while. Karen knocked on the door of his hallway, once, then again, but received no response. "Greg," she called out, "she's still your daughter." There was no answer from Greg, not because of cruelty, but because he was unsure if that statement was still true. At 6:42 a.m., Greg found himself in the garage, gazing at the old red toolbox that used to be Rachel's favorite hiding spot for her crayon drawings. The drawer was stuck down, just like everything else in his life lately. The truck's key fob hung on its usual hook, but there was a new addition underneath the shelf. An envelope labeled cabin contingency plan containing a D copy, access code, burner phone, and cash. Without hesitation, Greg took action. By 7:03 a.m., he had voided the last catering check in his online banking portal for the client's request to cancel the services. In the note section, he simply wrote, "Services no longer required," just like he had done with the others. With a sense of determination, he made a phone call. Ed the planner chimed in next, her excessively cheerful tone contrasting with the draining effect she had on him over the past month. "Mr. Whitaker, just a quick update on the rehearsal dinner. I only need a few confirmations for her." Interrupting her, Greg declared, "I'll have to step back from this, Ed. I'm sorry, but you'll need to find a new point of contact. I won't be involved any further." There was a moment of silence before Ed pushed back, "But I was told you were handling." Click. Moving on to his attorney, Greg swiftly informed Morning Doug of the necessary changes. Rachel is no longer involved. All proceeds go to a charity hospice fund in Cincinnati, and Karen's survivorship clause is to be removed. Doug's stunned silence spoke volumes. "Are you certain about this, Greg?" he finally asked. "I've never been more certain about anything," Greg affirmed. By noon, Greg had tied up loose ends by closing 4 financial accounts, updating his estate directives, redirecting his mail, and transferring a small sum from his joint checking account. $117.32, a calculated amount enough to avoid suspicion yet harmless in impact. And then he approached the final step, a decision that required precision. He gingerly opened an old unmarked. On his desktop, Greg found a folder labeled Rachel's first car title. Inside, he saw the scanned bill of sale for the silver Civic he had bought her after graduation, the car she had unfortunately totaled last year. Despite never receiving any repayment or gratitude from Rachel, she had simply remarked, "You're the dad, aren't you supposed to?" Feeling unappreciated, Greg decided to delete the file as if it had never existed. That evening, Karen knocked on the door once more, this time with a bit more urgency. "Greg, come on, you've made your point. She didn't mean to hurt you. He'd still be there, just let Brian." But Greg remained silent throughout the night until morning when Karen discovered he had vanished. His truck remained in the driveway, indicating that he hadn't left in a dramatic fashion. Instead, a cab arrived at 5:40 a.m. with its headlights turned off. Greg took only one bag and left without a farewell, not even acknowledging the family dog. At 9:12 a.m., Karen opened the fridge to find a note that Greg had left behind, saying simply, "Please don't water the plants, they're already dead." Confused by its meaning at first, Karen's confusion began to lift later that afternoon when Rachel called in tears about a florist who hadn't been paid and a DJ who claimed Greg had canceled their services. As the pieces started to come together, Karen began to feel the weight of the situation. Pictures of something constricting, not an outburst, not a struggle for control, something more menacing. Greg hadn't stormed away, he had calmly and systematically removed himself, like a surgeon excising a malignant tumor from his own existence before it could spread. "He's pouting," Karen remarked, twirling her mimosa with a self-satisfied flourish. "He'll come back. Greg can't hold a grudge, he just wants us to chase after him." Rachel remained absorbed in her phone, deliberating between two filtered images, one featuring her and Brian laughing together in front of the venue fountain, and another where he had his hand on her shoulder, attempting a paternal smile. She chose the latter, captioning it the perfect substitute any girl could hope for. Asterisk clink of glasses, asterisk hashtag blessed hashtag wedding week. The likes and heart emojis poured in with comments like "so sweet, you deserve the best," completely ignoring Greg. In the boutique, the atmosphere was jovial, champagne flowed. Karen posed with Rachel in front of the mirror, radiant. Greg would have hated all this wedding planning, she chuckled, adjusting the strap on Rachel's dress as if she were the bride herself. The fittings, the color swatches. He would have made that pained expression like he was passing the kidney stone. A bridal assistant returned, her smile strained, and informed them that the final payment for the gown had not been received, and the invoice was marked as disputed. Karen blinked in surprise. "No, that can't be right. My husband, well, ex-husband, already paid that weeks ago," she corrected herself. The assistant promised to double check and hurried off. Rachel waved it off as a simple mistake. "He probably used the wrong card," she shrugged. However, later that afternoon, another issue propped up at the florist. No payment confirmation and no scheduled delivery. When attempts to reach the florist failed, Rachel muttered, "God, he's really being petty." Karen nodded silently, her attention drawn to a text from the venue manager about the rehearsal schedule. Later, I noticed that the payment had been reversed. "We require full settlement by Friday in order to proceed. Please let me know," she responded promptly. "It's being taken care of, just a minor issue," was the assurance given. However, it was far from a minor hiccup. It was a gradual and intentional unraveling, a slow deterioration of all they had achieved, with the weight of it going unnoticed as the ground started to give way beneath. Meanwhile, Brian was relishing his moment in the spotlight. He would order extra wine at every lunch, openly discuss how Rachel needed someone more attentive, and casually refer to Greg as the standard in passing conversations. During brunch, as they toasted to new beginnings, Karen raised her glass and jokingly remarked, "Well, at least Brian won't put the guests to sleep like Greg would have. Remember his speech at Rachel's graduation? I was afraid the principal was going to doze off." Rachel and her friends laughed along, oblivious to the waiter casting a disapproving glance their way before moving on to another table. The table was aware that the DJ had packed up his equipment following the cancellation notice titled "Client Disengaged. All deposits void." Meanwhile, the bar tab Greg had organized for the reception had been flagged with a red banner on the vendor's dashboard, indicating payment withdrawal and an unresolved dispute. However, nobody had inquired about who was in control of the situation, assuming Greg would eventually give in. But Greg wasn't sulking. He was methodically and quietly making deductions. By the time the realization dawned on them, they were already posing for pictures on a stage that Greg had set on fire. The first thing that struck them upon exiting the rental car was the intense July heat of Ohio, enveloping them with its unrelenting stickiness. There was no sound from the air conditioning units, no background music playing through outdoor speakers, and no staff visible with clipboards and walkie-talkies. Just an eerie silence broken only by the distant buzz of staccatos. Rachel adjusted her. Karen tugged on the hem of her rehearsal dress and looked around the empty venue with confusion. She attempted the front door, only to find it locked. Just then, she noticed movement from the corner of her eye. A man in a blue polo shirt emerged from a side door. It was Mark, the venue manager, carrying a box of unsold champagne flutes, and seemed more interested in the cicadas than the upcoming wedding. "Hi, Karen," called Rachel with a forced smile, introducing herself as Rachel Waytaker and stating their purpose for being there. However, Mark didn't even reach for a clipboard and delivered unexpected news. "Oh yeah, there's been a bit of a snag," he said, scratching his ear. "The payment was reversed last night." "All of it?" Karen was taken aback, questioning what he meant by reversed, as the deposit had been made weeks ago. Mark confirmed that the final check had bounced, triggering a fraud alert, and policy dictated that without funds, the event couldn't proceed. Rachel, the sense of urgency in her voice, reminded Mark of the imminent wedding, the 200 invitations that had been sent out, the dress fitting scheduled for 6, and the officiant flying in from Atlanta. Mark raised both palms defensively as if avoiding bullets, explaining that he was just the messenger. Despite sending 2 follow-up emails with no response, he couldn't let them in due to strict managerial regulations. Karen's voice trembled as she emphasized the liability of hosting a rehearsal with a flagged account. Excusing herself, she stepped away to make a phone call, trying Greg for the 5th time in 3 days, only to reach his voicemail once again. Meanwhile, Rachel's pacing intensified, the click of her heels echoing like gunshots on the concrete as she fretted about the missing floors. After attempting to reach the floors with no success, Rachel exploded in frustration, speculating that Greg might be purposely causing the delay to punish her. However, her tirade was cut short by a text from Melissa Florals and Design clarifying the delay due to unpaid fees, prompting Rachel to angrily throw her phone to the ground, causing it to bounce once before cracking. As Karen surveyed the scene, missing from his usual post at the screen, her dependable backup Brian was nowhere to be seen. Concerned, she tried calling him but only reached his voicemail after 3 unanswered rings. In a frazzled state, she left an urgent message informing him of the chaotic situation at the venue. Despite her plea, there was no response. Guests arriving in confusion mounting, including elderly relatives and people left standing in the scorching heat under a pavilion without power. The situation was dire. To add to the chaos, the sprinkler system suddenly activated, drenching the upgraded folding chairs in an ironic twist. Karen, now wiping her forehead with a tissue, and Rachel, sitting on the concrete in disarray, shared a moment of silent realization. Greg was not only absent, but had orchestrated the dismantling of the entire event. Despite smiling throughout the operation, everything appeared to be in perfect order until they attempted to use the setup. It quickly became clear that what once seemed flawless was now nothing more than a facade, a mere illusion of a wedding. Amidst the confusion, guests clad in pastel dresses and borrowed suits filled the parking lot, fanning themselves with programs that proudly displayed the names Rachel and Brian. The ceremony was scheduled to commence at 1 o'clock. However, by 1:12, the DJ table remained deserted, devoid of any equipment save for a plastic chair and a tangled AUX cable laid haphazardly on top. The string lights adorning the ceremony arch flickered intermittently, some bulbs already extinguished, while others struggled to maintain their feeble glow. Whispers among the attendees questioned if this was intentional for the wedding's aesthetic. Meanwhile, in a makeshift prep room that doubled as a janitor's closet within the venue's rear wing, Rachel sat disheveled in a worn velvet chair, tears smearing her mascara and her hair still wrapped in curlers. Karen found herself at a loss upon discovering that her dress was still at the boutique. Despite her attempts to pay for it that morning, all of her cards were declined. The boutique owner had politely but firmly informed her that the dress could not be released until the outstanding balance was settled. Now Rachel was stuck in an emergency dress from a department store that was 3 sizes too big, held together at the back with binder clips. She resembled a child pretending to be a bride in her mother's oversized nightgown. As she trembled, Rachel whispered, "Can't go out like this. People will laugh." Karen knelt beside her, comforting her by saying, "They won't laugh, honey. They'll understand." Rachel, with tears in her eyes, asked, "Where is Brian?" Just then, the door creaked open and Brian carelessly entered the room. He was only half buttoned into his dress shirt, sunglasses still on, smelling of whiskey and poor choices. Carrying the cup from a local pub and an unlit cigar behind his ear, he appeared like a disheveled middle-aged pirate. Slurring his words, Brian greeted the ladies. Are we ready to do this? Surprised, Rachel stood up and asked, Are you drunk? Brian replied nonchalantly, Just a bit of nerves, sweetheart. I mean this sincerely. It's quite a bit, isn't it? He glanced around the janitor's closet as if it were a luxurious suite. I must admit, I'm not entirely comfortable with taking on a fatherly role. I mean, you were raised by Greg. The way he uttered Greg's name suggested a distaste as though he couldn't bear the mere mention of it. Karen, please, not now, Brian intervened, but he continued. This whole situation is peculiar. I thought I was here to assist, not to step into that role. He gestured vaguely towards the dimly lit reception hall. It's as if everyone is just pretending. Karen urgently grabbed his elbow, whispering, You need to keep it together. Meanwhile, at the altar, the officiant stood beneath a wilting floral arch with an air of awkwardness. Guests shifted in their seats, exchanging murmurs. The groom, Rachel's high school sweetheart, was visibly sweating through his tuxedo, repeatedly checking his watch. Still, there was no music, no food, no announcements, and no sign of the bride. A passing waiter carried a lone tray of finger sandwiches, leftovers from a previous event. A bridesmaid hastily grabbed two and began to devour them. In her clutch, the officiant approached the groom, questioning the possibility of a delay. Met with silence, the growing sense of shame was no longer subtle but palpable, diffusing through the humid air like the smoke from Brian's unlit cigar. Individuals began to sense that something was amiss beyond mere disorganization. It was unmistakably wrong. By 2:10, an elderly uncle had already departed, followed by the flower girl's mother loudly questioning the situation at 2:20. At 2:30, a whisper finally articulated the nagging thought of all present. Where was the father of the bride? The absence, now a conspicuous void, transformed into a spectacle, culminating in a tragic performance. The catalyst was Rachel's cousin Megan, known for her ever-changing hair color and dramatic online persona. While standing outside the venue amidst the chaos at 3:04 p.m., clutching her smeared makeup kit, Megan hastily tweeted, Bride's real dad left her hanging at the altar. Hashtag family drama, hashtag wedding woes. The wedding was all set and paid for, but everything came to a halt when the bride chose her mom's affair partner to walk her down the aisle. The situation caused quite a stir in the small Ohio town, quickly going viral within the local community. By 4:00 p.m., a TikTok video was circulating from a high school classmate showing a chaotic scene at the wedding venue with no food, no music, a prime bride, and even the groom shedding tears. Rumor has it that the bride's father called off the wedding upon learning he had been replaced by the affair partner. Meanwhile, in Greg's old neighborhood, a group of retirees playing poker on a porch discussed the shocking turn of events at Rachel Whittaker's wedding, the same wedding that Greg had funded. In another part of town, laughter filled a dental clinic break room as a tweet about the wedding disaster was shared among the staff. Bunko Davis, it seems that Karen's chickens have finally come home to roost. Greg, who always kept meticulous records, is at the center of the town's gossip. During dinner, the conversation transitioned from small talk over appetizers to discussions on the street. Neighbors gathered on their driveways while grilling, sharing whispers and rumors. The bar on Milton Street even introduced a new drink called the Silent Exit, consisting of bourbon, meat, and no ice. In the local Facebook group, Chart and Chatters, the buzz was a mix of community love and drama. A post titled, Did you hear what happened at the Whittaker wedding? Quickly gained traction, accumulating 327 comments within 5 hours. People who had not interacted with Greg in years suddenly began recalling snippets of information and subtle signals they had noticed over time. One individual even unearthed an old community award that Greg had received for organizing a fundraiser back in 2012. Amidst all the speculation, one woman pointed out that a man like Greg doesn't just disappear without a plan. She suggested that his vanishing act was intentional and not accidental. Simultaneously, a local reporter from the County Register reached out to Greg's brother Tom, who managed the hardware store, seeking clarification on the rumors surrounding Greg's sudden withdrawal. Of Rachel's wedding, word is he paid for it all, then left. We're running a weekend feature on small town chaos. Tom didn't reply. He just locked his phone and stared at the counter for a long moment, then quietly flipped the close sign. He knew Greg wouldn't say a word. That was the worst part for Karen and Rachel. He hadn't screamed, hadn't stormed out, hadn't even defended himself. He had simply let the weight of their own actions drop like gravity, pulling a chandelier down from a fraying cord. And now, with every tweet, every whisper, every post, that chandelier was falling fast, and the whole town had a front row seat. By 6:15 p.m., what remained of the reception looked like the aftermath of a school fundraiser gone terribly wrong. The chairs were still out, scattered and half occupied by dazed relatives chewing through vending machine trail mix. The venue's emergency lights flickered like a dying bug zapper above the dance floor, which was ironically immaculate, untouched, and painfully silent. There was no music, no dinner, no laughter, just the low-grade murmur of guests trying not to say what they were all thinking. This wedding is a corpse, and no one had the decency to bury it. Karen stood near the gift table, staring blankly at the untouched stack of monogrammed favors and engraved keychains that now felt sarcastic. R and B forever starts today, she cracked. No slow burn, no gradual unraveling, just a full gasping collapse into the white chair next to the unplugged sound system. She began crying, the kind of cry that makes strangers look away and friends pretend they didn't see it. Whole body, shoulders shaking, makeup running, a jagged mess of moans and swallowed sobs. Nobody moved to comfort her because by now, even her oldest friends weren't sure what side they were on. Inside the bridal suite, the air smelled like hairspray and panic. The room was hot, overheated from the broken HVAC. Rachel was pacing barefoot on the tile, holding her phone like it was a lifeline. She had tried calling Greg 4 times already. It was the 5th call she made, still met with silence and sent straight to voicemail. Frustrated, she pondered what message her friend could possibly leave. Sorry for using your money to replace you with the man who was involved with your wife. I hope you're enjoying your time at the beach while we face the consequences publicly. With a sense of disbelief, she hung up the phone and stared at her reflection in the mirror. The new department store dress she was wearing clung awkwardly to her back, revealing a slip where one of the pins had come loose. This moment reminded her of the intimacy shared with Greg, who used to kiss her goodnight after reading bedtime stories about talking frogs and brave girls. Outside the room, Brian's frustration was evident as he paced back and forth, his face flushed and agitated. I warned you this was a mistake, he exclaimed. Can't handle this pressure. I thought I was helping, not. Rachel interrupted him, her gaze piercing. You were the one who wanted to go through with this plan. You agreed to it? Brian hesitated. He erupted in anger, expressing frustration with the situation involving his missing father at the wedding. He was shocked that his father disappeared after funding the entire event, not realizing the extent of his financial support until it was too late. The sudden absence of the DJ led to tension between the characters, with Brian feeling underappreciated and Rachel shocked by the unfolding events. The atmosphere became somber, akin to a funeral rather than a celebration. Karen isolated herself in a room, rejecting any attempts at communication. When the groom attempted to confront her, she simply told him to leave. Rachel desperately tried to reach her father, Greg, but was met with voicemail each time. As she stared at her phone screen, the silence from Greg felt like a harsh reality check for everyone involved. Exactly what they'd become Sunday morning while Rachel lay curled on the floor of the bridal suite, still in the wrinkled dress, surrounded by wilting roses and unfinished apology drafts. A photo appeared on Facebook. It wasn't posted by Greg. It came from a man named Dave Holloway, an old fishing buddy from his construction days who had no interest in drama and barely knew how hashtags worked. Picture showed Greg in a windbreaker, holding the striped bass with both hands, grinning like someone who had just remembered what peace felt like. The Atlantic glimmered behind him, calm and wide, and indifferent to the wreckage he left behind in Ohio. The caption was simple. Greg came down last minute, said he needed air. Best weekend I've had in years. There was no mention of weddings. No references to Rachel, Karen, or even the implosion. Just joy, clean, unashamed joy. It took 12 minutes for someone to screenshot it and text it to the Bunko Davos group chat, 20 minutes for it to appear in the Chardon Chatters Facebook. As the wedding went up in flames, Dad decided to go fishing by lunchtime. This incident was captured in a tweet featuring the juxtaposition of Rachel's distraught appearance at the reception and Greg's content smile by the sea. The meme format added a humorous touch, portraying the bride as the victim. The caption highlighted how the fish seemed to show more respect towards Greg than his own family did. The mood was captured in the image of Greg enjoying a beer as chaos ensued in Ohio. Karen's friend Melanie quietly shared the screenshot with just the image and timestamp to Karen, who stared at it in disbelief before throwing her phone against the closet wall. As news of the incident spread throughout town, even those who initially avoided the drama began openly discussing it. Signs of support and admiration for Greg surfaced, with the bar advertising a whiskey shot special in his honor. Comments on social media painted Greg as a symbol of composure in the face of turmoil, with some noting his quiet demeanor and how he had made a bold statement through his actions. As the local journalist mustered the courage to reach out for more information, he sent an email to the forwarding address she had acquired from public records. Courteous and professional, dear Greg, I am currently working on a piece regarding the Whittaker wedding, which seems to be generating quite a bit of conversation. I would greatly appreciate your perspective, even a brief statement on the matter. Greg, seated on the cabin porch, breathed in the salt air as he sipped his still warm coffee. Upon reading the message, he chose not to respond, nor did he delete it. Instead, he closed his laptop and resumed his activity of whittling the driftwood in his possession. It was not a hobby, rather, a distraction from contemplating those who prioritize spectacle over loyalty. His silence spread swiftly, transcending any scandal. It morphed into a tale because Greg did not feel the need to raise his voice. The resulting chaos spoke volumes on his behalf. With each unanswered call, every photograph depicting him joyfully overlooking the ocean, and the publicized turmoil back in Ohio, his piece exuded a unique power, not born of resentment, but rather because Greg Whittaker had ultimately ceased to justify himself. And when a reserved individual ceases to explain, the world truly begins to pay attention. Chart & Ledger recently released a community snapshot described as a polished version of local rumors. The headline was attention-grabbing: a father funding a wedding only to be replaced by his wife's affair partner. In response, he decided to disappear and cancel all plans. Although no names were mentioned, the details made the individuals involved easily identifiable. The piece included images of a poorly lit venue, a crumpled guest list, discarded flowers, and a screenshot from a controversial Facebook post. The article also featured a cell phone picture of the distraught Rachel in what appeared to be a janitor's closet. The journalist thoroughly researched the story, presenting it without rumors or exaggerations, with evidence such as receipts and public quotes. The article quickly gained traction, causing the Ledger's website to crash. Buzzline Daily later picked up the story, tilling it bride ditched under their human interest section. As mom's ex-lover quietly sabotaged her wedding from behind the scenes, chaos erupted. Twitter exploded with reactions, likening him to a cunning villain in a flannel shirt and modern-day Thanos. Greg, the groom, didn't retaliate with anger but instead orchestrated a silent and legendary form of revenge. This intriguing tale spread like wildfire across various online platforms, gaining traction in Reddit threads, group chats, and even meme pages usually dedicated to lighthearted dad jokes. A verified therapist on Twitter even chimed in, stating that what transpired was not just revenge, but rather a display of self-respect reaching its breaking point. Meanwhile, Karen, the ex-lover, found herself secluded in Rachel's guest bedroom, enveloped in darkness with only the glow of her iPad illuminating the room and her overwhelming sense of shame. Each notification ping from her inbox felt like another dagger, a reminder of the unwelcome attention she was receiving. Although she hesitated to engage with the unfolding narrative, the online backlash was relentless. Despite her attempts to defend herself on social media, the article shared with her in a text message containing only a skull emoji had already garnered widespread attention. With the top comment on the article amassing 14K upvotes, Karen's efforts to alter the discourse seemed futile. Rachel not only burned bridges, but she also actively facilitated the destruction by involving her affair partner and even asking her father to rebuild them. Frantically checking her social media, Rachel faced harsh criticism for relying on her father's wealth, but lacking his integrity. She pondered if the DJ could be paid with tears instead. Replacing her own father with the man who caused her parents' breakup seemed to have unforeseen consequences. Deleting her Instagram followed by Twitter and TikTok didn't stop the spread of screenshots. The internet, unforgiving, immortalized her actions. While Greg chose not to retaliate but instead disappeared, the impact of his absence reverberated louder than any confrontation would have. Karen and Rachel, now publicly exposed, realized they had underestimated a man who never defended himself. His voice had always been a silent presence, unneeded until now. Understanding that silence would bring an end to the cruelty that had plagued him, Greg returned to town 3 weeks after the ill-fated wedding. There were no announcements on social media, no phone calls, no visits to familiar homes. He simply required lumber. A soft spot had developed on the back porch of his cabin, and there was a poetic irony in fixing his foundation while others stood by as theirs decayed. Parking his truck outside Homeworks Hardware as he had for the past 2 decades, he entered with the ease of a man who had never left. The familiar jingle of the doorbell filled the air as the scents of pine, rubber, and dust enveloped him. Time seemed to linger in this place, resisting movement or change. As Greg stood in aisle 7, inspecting Seder boards, a voice he knew all too well sounded from behind him. It was not raised in anger, but carried a deep sense of brokenness. Dad. Greg did not immediately turn around. Instead, he focused on the smooth, flawless wood in his hands, a symbol of reliability amidst chaos. He set it down, ready to face what awaited him. Dad, please. The voice cracked mid-syllable, a plea caught in the throat. He finally turned. Rachel stood at the end of the aisle, makeup-free in faded jeans and an oversized sweatshirt. Her eyes were rimmed red, no wedding ring. Her phone hung limply in her hand like she'd forgotten she was holding it. She took one step toward him, then stopped. You were right, she whispered about all of it. Greg didn't move. His face didn't change. He didn't flinch, sigh, or shake his head. He just looked at her, not like a stranger, not like a father, but like a man remembering that once long ago, he had stood in a courtroom watching his family choose someone else. Like a man who had silently swallowed the bitterness of being replaced, dismissed, and expected to keep smiling while funding the entire performance. He took a breath, small and steady, then turned back toward the lumber rack. Rachel stepped forward. Dad, I was stupid. Karen made it sound like. Rachel wasn't even sure which version of the lie she wanted to defend anymore, but Greg didn't answer. He didn't need to. Picking up the Sidar board again, he checked the edge and started walking toward checkout. Rachel followed behind him, trailing like an apology with no legs. I miss you, she said, her desperation palpable. I didn't realize how much until you were gone. Greg paused at the end of the aisle, not turning to look back, just adjusting the board under his arm. Then, in a tone not cruel or loud, but final, he spoke one sentence. You made that decision before I did. With that, he headed to the register, paid in cash, and left without any further words. There was no hug, no scene. Just a man who had once been left standing in the emotional wreckage of his own family, walking away from the aftermath they created without him. For the first time in Rachel's life, her father didn't offer to fix it.